So now we're in the inside of the skull. We're going to start at the front here, near the frontal bone. You'll see here that there's a sharp fin-like structure that sticks out. This is known as the crista galli. The crista galli has a flat surface on either side of it. This, of course, is called the cribriform plate. There are holes that are inside the cribriform plate known as the olfactory foramina. That's what you see here, these little small holes here. There's a hole in front of the crista galli, right here, and that is called the foramen cecum. As we move further away from the frontal bone, you'll see that there's kind of a manta ray-like structure that sticks out here. This, of course, is known as the lesser wing of the sphenoid. Off of the manta ray-like structure, you'll see that there's these little two structures that are sticking out here and here. They're known as the anterior clinoid processes. In between the anterior clinoid processes is a depression right here that is designed to actually allow for the optic chiasm to sit. And so this is known as the tuberculum sella, but more commonly known as the chiasmatic groove. The chiasmatic groove sits in between these two openings here and here. And those are the openings that are also from the front of the orbit of the eyes, and that, of course, is where the optic nerve travels through. So this is the optic canal right here and here. Below the tuberculum sella, which is here, down here, is, of course, the hypophyseal fossa, where the hypophysis, aka the pituitary, sits. Okay? Behind the hypophyseal fossa is this kind of football goal-like structure right here, where you have the processes sticking out, which are known as the posterior clinoid processes, and this depression right here, which is known as the dorsum sella. All together, this entire area, which includes the tuberculum sella, the hypophyseal fossa, the dorsal sella, and the posterior and anterior clinoid processes, all of that collectively forms what is called the sella turcica. Okay? Now, if we are to look here, this area that comes around here and cuts up this way and goes all the way up and cuts up this way, forming kind of a butterfly-like structure, that would be considered the greater wing of the sphenoid. If we look, we can see that there are the three openings that I discussed on the underside of the skull that form the triangle of openings: lacerum, ovale, and spinosum. Those three form the little triangle again. In front of the triangle is an opening right here called the foramen rotundum. In this spot right here, where the dark spot is here, that's where the carotid canal would be on here. Now, this protrusion of the temporal bone here that looks kind of like a ridge or a mountain, this is known as the petrous portion of the temporal bone. If we were to look at the side of the petrous portion of the temporal bone, right here, you can see that there is a depression there. That is actually where the internal auditory meatus would be found. Below that, below the internal auditory meatus would then be a larger opening here, where the jugular vein would actually come out of the skull. So this is actually the jugular foramen from the inside of the skull, where I showed you before where it was coming out on the outside. Below that is another opening right here, and that is the condyloid canal, which is another opening that you can find both on the inside of the skull as well as on the outside of the skull, on the underside, where it's right behind the occipital condyle, which I showed you that as well. Then we have, of course, these depressions, which are then associated with the sini that then vascularize the brain. So we would have basically a depression here, where it would be associated with the transverse sinus and then the sigmoid sinus here. And again, we have, of course, the external occipital protuberance, which is here, but now on the inside. So this would be the internal occipital protuberance. All right, so that is the inside of the skull that you will need to know.